All right, without further ado, I'm excited to introduce Kaaren Hanson to you guys. Her talk is on what execs won't tell you, but designers and PMs need to know. She has been the VP of Design at Medallia here for how long now?
A year and 1 month.
A year and 1 month, nice. So I had the pleasure of working with her all the time, and it's really a pleasure. Before that, she was a VP of Design Innovation at Intuit. If you guys have ever heard Intuit's Design for Delight or D for D program, she drove that. And I learned this from LinkedIn. You have a PhD in experimental psychology from Stanford, so that's great. So without further ado, let's welcome Kaaren Hanson.
Turn this on. So Dan, what I'm trying to figure out is how I'm going to text while I talk because I still haven't gotten one of your books.
I'll give you one.
Oh.
I owe you one. That's my bad, because she actually wrote a nice endorsement on the back, so you definitely get one.
Just know, you got to watch him. You got to be on him. I'm actually not sure that this is going to work, so I might actually take that. That'll help. Yeah, let me switch.
You'd rather? It's on.
Okay, great. On?
I'll turn it up a little bit, yeah.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you for having me here. What I'm going to share with you is actually some lessons that I pulled together a couple years ago for a talk at Warm Gun, which is a conference in San Francisco. My background is that I have been in the design space for a long time, and I have been a design executive for about 12 years or so. And in that time, I have learned a lot of lessons. And I learned many of those lessons a very, very hard way, meaning it hurt a lot, right? And I figured that what I would do is I would pull together some of those lessons to share with you in the hopes that all of you would be able to be even more effective than I was at that time by learning my lessons without the pain. Sound good? Okay. So first of all, I actually want to hear from you. I want you to spend 2 minutes talking to the person next to you and sharing a story of when you were either with some execs or when you left the room with some execs and when you felt kind of uncomfortable. Right? Doesn't need to mean anything horrible happened, but it means you walked away and you thought, I wonder how that just went. Or maybe something horrible happened. I'll tell you some of those too. Okay? 2 minutes, grab the person next to you. You can do a triad if that's easier, and share a story of something that happened when you were uncomfortable. After 2 minutes, you'll switch. Who's talking? of when they felt uncomfortable. Who's ready?
Next week I'll have them.
I'll go.
Okay, let's hear it.
Should I stand up?
Sure, stand up.
Hi guys. So one time I felt uncomfortable because of my execs a while ago. Kind of a weird situation. So I was meeting with a coworker of mine, a friend of mine, we worked pretty closely with, even though we're on separate teams. And he was struggling with an employee that he thought he'd have to let go, and he was, really struggling with it. So we talked it out, and he said, "Okay, I'll go talk to my boss, decide what we should do." His boss was the VP level, and said, "Yeah, let's let him go." So we, not me, but we as a company started that process, and then he was actually pretty gone, and received, I guess, even his severance pay, and then. Our CEO actually said, "No, I'd like to talk to him before we let him go," and reversed our decision, which kind of put us in a really awkward position because he got his severance pay. He was pretty gone at that moment. So then we were left kind of thinking, well, why did you do that? Which was really what made me uncomfortable, because what does that say about what direction we're going in overall, right? So. Yeah, I think things later on became pretty clear and everything, but I was uncomfortable for a little while, so there you go.
That's it.
Great sharing. Okay, who else has something? Yes.
I think this happened around about maybe 15 years back. I was fresh out of the school, and I had nothing to, people gave me nothing to work on, so I don't know what to do at my work, so I hacked into some stuff and then compiled some stuff. And later when my CEO was talking in a meeting, I went and directly asked him, why didn't we do this kind of a thing? Well, I'm talking about Apple. It was in 2000 when I was a fresh school grad. I took entire OS X and then compiled it on my x86 box, because they told me that I'll be working on some secret project, but they didn't give me a project for first 2 months. So I don't know what to do. So I compiled it and went and asked Steve Jobs, why are we still fighting with Dell with all running on a G4 or a G3 processor when we can run the entire OS X on a Intel platform? That's when he said that, if you have this kind of ideas, that Apple is not the right company to work. And I think he said this in front of almost 5,000 people. So
That's raising the bar on uncomfortable. How about another story? I want 2 more. It doesn't have to be that uncomfortable.
Yeah, I don't know if mine's to that level either. So I'm a UX researcher, and I was presenting my results from a tree test to figure out an information architecture for a site to a client. And one of the questions, we had gone back and forth in the weeks beforehand on how we were going to ask the question. It was basically one word difference, kind of almost a typo situation. And the way that the test ended up being published, which was my fault, was the incorrect way that had changed at the last minute. And so I still included it in the presentation because I thought we could garner some, results from it. And then I got basically a, stop talking about this right now. Every minute you're talking about this is wasting me money. And that was rough. But I think it was right. I mean, it was kind of a distraction, and so I learned that hard lesson, maybe, for the theme of tonight.
You don't just have a scar, you have a star on you, right? Good job, you survived. All right, how about one more? All right, good.
So for ours, it was a task force for improving some of our education training products. And we worked with a bunch of teams, both in customer experience, but also with our sales teams. And we came up with a couple of pretty good ideas, but at the same time, once the project ended, we actually had a brief one-on-one with the senior VP of customer experience, and she said, yeah, that's all well and good, but strategically, long-term, this department and that product's going away. So you kind of wasted the last month and a half, 2 months.
Sounds like that's a theme though about not wasting time. Okay, so a lot of my stories and lessons are actually going to be around design and helping executives to better get design and act on design and champion design. They've also sprinkled in some other elements. I ended up being in a lot of meetings with my CEO and my founders at the various companies and others, and hearing the talk that happens after other people leave the room has been really interesting. So I have some sort of lessons learned from that as well. Okay? All right, so with that, let's talk about design and executives. So I would argue that pretty much every executive out there, unless they've been living underneath a rock, that's in the technology space and even beyond, knows that the design is important, right? I mean, it's not just these headlines, there's headlines everywhere, right? So why aren't all companies design driven? Thoughts? Well, I'll tell you why I think it's true. It's because they don't really get design, right? They're not designers, they're not craftspeople, they're typically business people who have been very successful, but they don't really get design at a visceral level. So I'm going to tell you a story from many years ago, and it was when I was with a very bold designer who was very brave, and he and I went to visit our executive at the time, who was very old school, and who was very processy in his background. And we were thinking about how to help him understand how important design was, and design was going to save the company, and it was great, and we just had to show him some really great examples of great design. And he had a really strong point of view on a couple items, and I agreed with him, right? So we went into his office, and what we brought with us, in addition to our talk track and our evidence, was an Alessi juicer, right? So what's great about an Alessi juicer? Well, it's reimagining the standard juicer, right? It's doing so in a very elegant way. It charges a premium price point, and it has a point of view, right? And it's striking, and you remember it. And the craftsmanship is exquisite. So we went in there, and we thought that this would help him to kind of understand design and the importance of it and the impact it can have. And his response was very fast. Not pretty, right? Not sure if he was talking about the juicer or us, but we left with the juicer. It was swift. So it took us several months. Actually, I don't think my friend ever went back, but it took me several months to gather the courage to go back and speak with him again. And the lesson here really is that where we were coming from versus where he was coming from was a very great distance. And for us to have started off with something like an Alessi juicer, which frankly, probably he didn't have in his home, he actually didn't value, wasn't helpful, right? Because it was too far a bridge for him to get there. So by reaching too far, we were no longer relevant to him. Does that make sense? Reminds me of a video that's on YouTube, and I forget what it's called, but it shows like somebody, like the notion that if you're too far ahead, you're not even with the parade, right? And in this case, we were so far ahead, we weren't actually even leading a parade, right? We were just two weirdos off in the distance. All right, so lesson number one is they don't really get design, which means you have to work very hard in a very different way to help them to get design, and I can tell you a little bit more about that later. All right, my other learning is they don't really get designers either. Okay? So I don't know if you've ever had executives be part of the interviewing for your designers or your design teams. Yeah? No? Raise your hands if you have. Yeah. Okay, and I see some and some smiles, right? You can get some really different feedback. Right? So here's basically what I found happens is you have a designer who comes out with their portfolio, and they have all kinds of wonderful artifacts in that portfolio. And they're very human-centered, and they talk about all the ideas they've come up with, and they show you some artifacts that really should just make your jaw drop, right? But sometimes when they're answering questions about how they, for example, moved from one job to another, right? Things you might think aren't that relevant for being a designer, they might give an answer that exec thinks is not the best answer, and I can give you an example of that. But the upshot is when that designer walks away, instead of remembering that wonderful portfolio, what that exec is thinking is they're just not strategic. Because what they're really evaluating is your ability to be strategic. And they're often evaluating that ability to be strategic based on the choices you've made in the past. So I'll give you a couple of examples. There was a designer I once interviewed, and it came out why had this particular individual changed their job. Well, the reason they said is because they were pregnant and they needed a job with health insurance. Right? Totally human, totally real. Does not mean they're not a great designer. But something like that was something this executive simply couldn't get over, because what they were looking for was, hey, I went from this job to this job because it provided me with greater advancement opportunity, because it allowed me to get into a sphere of the industry that I hadn't been in before, because it was going to give me greater reach into this particular niche that I cared about, or let me use a new technology. So I think that all of us have made job changes and job choices for very personal reasons. I know that when I had a 3-month-old baby, the company I was working for got bought by a company in Houston, and they wanted me to take on a bigger role, and the choices were I could either move to Houston, which was a no way in hell, or I could travel to Houston 2 weeks out of 4, which was the same answer, right? However, while I do say that that was part of my thinking, it was actually 99% of my thinking, but I also comment about how, it was a better opportunity for these reasons, and it was a new industry, and blah, 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 right? So you got to kind of balance it out to walk that fine line. Yes, be authentic, but they're evaluating how strategic are you. All right, and the heart here just goes to show they love things like Stanford, Yale, Harvard, McKinsey, Bain, right? Like, that just says to them, oh my God, you are branded and we know you are good. So, since most designers aren't out there cultivating these badges, right? I actually think about it as like badges, like in the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts. And you laugh, no, I kid you not. Some people who go to B school, they learn this, right? And I didn't learn this until about 5 years ago, that I was like, oh, your resume is like a series of brands. Who the hell knew? Because designers don't think that way, right? They think about the experiences and the team and what's going to be fun and interesting and helpful. All right. So another thing about executives, here's how else they're going to evaluate you. They're going to evaluate a lot on what it is that you're sharing as alternatives. So sometimes, oftentimes, people get really excited about what they want to do, right? And actually I heard some examples of uncomfortableness when people had an idea and maybe it was not supported. So sometimes what happens is someone will have an idea, and you'll see this idea, and I actually have seen this a lot. And you see the benefits, right? That are all listed out and how great this idea is, right? And then you see the risks, things like, oh, it might not be resourced appropriately. Kid you not. And Jolene is laughing because she just saw this the other day. And what happens is those execs aren't going to get into the details of what's happening, but they are going to evaluate you to say, are you credible? Are you smart? Are you actually balanced? Can I actually trust you? Because that's a lot of what they're trying to figure out. Can I trust you, and should I trust your judgment? And when I show you something like this, their view of you is, God, you're not credible. And once that assessment is made, it is going to take a long damn time to dig yourself out of that hole. So when you are sharing an option or options, boy, be really thoughtful and hard and truthful about what those weaknesses are. Because it's not even necessarily about getting what you want in the short term, but it's about making sure you're building your credibility over the long term. And frankly, you're also being honest and doing the right thing for the company. All right, so, any questions? So I'm going to tell you a different story. Yeah, go ahead.
So, what I understood is that just because the benefits far outweigh that one weakness, so that makes you lose your credibility?
Do the benefits outweigh that one weakness? No, this is not a very viable weakness. Like,
so
I would say,
I kind of didn't get the point exactly.
okay, so the point here is, there's all these benefits you've very much thought through, right? You've thought through all the goodness that could happen if everything works out well. What is the risk to this idea? If you haven't been very thoughtful and come up with some real risks, like it might not be resourced appropriately, it's just like a bullshit answer you could say for anything, right? That's just a risk that you could say for anything at any level, and it's the same risk that anything has. Like, what's the real risk of this idea? Right? Be super rigorous and thoughtful, because that's how people know if you're actually being balanced and thinking deeply. Because everything we want to do, well, not everything, nearly everything we want to do has potential benefits, but boy, there are risks as well. And that's about being strategic and thoughtful.
Got it, thanks.
Yep, good. I'm glad you asked a question, because sometimes I'm not as clear as I should be. All right, so this is just another story of how to, an attempt to have influence. So this is someone who used to lead a design team. And this particular person had a lot of good books that they read. Right? Maybe not as good as Dan's book, but good books. And this person would try to influence others by giving them books, right, to read. Okay? They would give them the gift of a book. Okay? So anybody ever tried that?
Yeah.
I see some head nods. Yes, people have tried that. Okay, so here's the secret truth about that. A book is not a gift. A book is a burden. If somebody gives you a book, the implication is you're going to read that book, right? And they might ask you what you thought about it, and all of a sudden you have this pile of books. So it's not a gift, it's a burden. Now the reaction when this guy was not in the room was this. I kid you not, right? So, a couple of problems. One, if your nickname is Eeyore, huge problem. Okay? So for those of you who don't know Eeyore, Eeyore is, I don't know, how would you describe Eeyore, Dan?
Downtrodden sourpuss.
Yeah.
Negative Nelly.
Negative Nelly, downtrodden, sourpuss, right? The world is always bad. So in this case, two problems. One, he was an energy drain, right? One of the big questions that always gets looked at as you're rating and ranking people and calibrating them is, are they an energy amplifier? Or do they suck energy out of the room? Are they actually helping the larger team to get better, or are they harming it? The other problem is, it was another book. These guys didn't want to read another frickin' book. I actually I had breakfast with the founder of my former company, and I brought him a book, and I told him, I said, this book is actually a bunch of crap, but the speaker's really good. So here's the book so you can remember the name of the speaker. And I wrote on a post-it inside, not worth reading, speaker great. And he said to me, he's like, I am so glad you told me this, because I don't want to read another book. I know. Okay. So, how do you explain design? Showing them a lussie juicer does not work. How do you guys explain design? Yeah.
I think it's like what you say, how to make a product look striking and memorable, and also maybe how to put it together to make it simpler to understand.
So just for the rest of you, how to make a product look striking and memorable, and how to put it together in a way that people understand. Sound good? That's good. Okay. What else? What are other ideas?
I think generally design is solving problems.
Mm-hmm. Design is solving problems, yep. Agree with that one too. What else? Yeah.
Solving problems that will meet the business goals.
Solving problems with your business goals. Yeah. I would say, oh yeah, go ahead. One more.
Design is to enhance product market fit.
To enhance product market fit, or maybe even uncover product market fit. Okay, yeah. So what we learned when we were at Intuit, and there were a lot of us on this Intuit journey for many, many, many years. But what we learned at Intuit is that design is like water, right? And you can't really describe it. How do you describe water? You can describe it as hydrogen molecules and oxygen molecules. Well, that's not really it, right? The way you figure it out is you jump right in. So what we found to be very effective with the same executive who kicked us out of his office was to have them share an experience that delighted them. And what was interesting is that it allowed us to understand where they were coming from. It had some other benefits as well. So one person on this team actually described Comcast as a delightful experience. Kid you not, right? But to be fair, when you think about his story, he talked about how, and I still remember it to this day, even though this was like back in 2008, maybe even 2007. 2007. He talked about how he had called and how the person on the other line offered him a couple of options, told him which one was the best for him in terms of the cheapest price. He called back, got the same person on the phone. That person got him an appointment scheduled for the next day in a 2-hour window. Top of that 2-hour window, that person showed up, got it all done, it worked perfectly. And when he was talking about it, he actually told the story with much more animation and referred to Maureen or whoever was on the phone and how exciting this all was. And what was really important is that other people in the room started to feel the feeling of when somebody feels delighted. Right? And those feelings are catching. There's a lot of research that feelings are catching, which is why you want to surround yourself generally with people who are fairly happy and energizing. You guys are nodding because you know it's true. So we had a large variety of experiences that mattered and that delighted these individuals. It also helped us understand where they were coming from. And when we did that, we saw, wow, no wonder that Alessi juicer really didn't work. And to be fair, these are things that delight me. These are not the things that came up in 2008. All right, this is just for fun.
The Tesla one really works though. So I have a CTO.
Yeah.
And the Tesla thing was like, I get it, man. Design.
Yeah, Tesla
I was
worked
like,
for you?
Look at your Tesla. And he's like, oh.
Yeah.
I get it.
Okay, so good tip from everybody. This gentleman over here shared the Tesla with his CEO, and the CEO was like, oh, I get it. Okay. One time I had a CTO, and someone on my team asked him on his first day, oh, what's your favorite, most favorite product experience? And his answer was VMware. But I also figured it was okay. It was kind of like the baseline, right? It can only get better. And afterwards I told him, like, couldn't you have just said your car? Like, really? All right. So helping people to feel it, and again, having them self-reflect is super duper powerful. What we've also done in the past is we have explicitly had our execs do emotional journey mapping to help them get better in touch with the experiences that they're feeling, that others are feeling. In order to become an executive at a fairly large company, you've often had to deal with quite a bit of politics and quite a bit of bad things, right? And often people get pretty tough. They've got scars on their back and they kind of don't notice those emotions as much anymore, right? Which is not always the best thing for understanding and also especially for designing great experiences. So even by going through what's an example of the day and then afterwards having them go through and do something like buy a coffee at Starbucks or observe someone buying a coffee at Starbucks and noticing how was their mood when they began and ended and whatnot, can be very helpful. Just repeated exposure to emotions. This is an example of something that we did at Intuit. A gentleman named Stephen Gay actually pulled together this one. He's a fantastic design leader. This was how we got our execs to understand mobile and mobile design. So the big question was, how do we help them to do this? And what we came up with was, let's build a scavenger hunt. We gave them all either iPhones or Androids. At the time, this was back in 2009. And we had them use various apps that we had put on the phones for them. And these apps took them on a scavenger hunt, in this case throughout Japantown. Previously, we'd done it just with the CEO and his team, and that was out in Half Moon Bay. But this was with the VPs and above, which was about 100 people. So we had them run through the streets of San Francisco in teams, and they would have to, for example, go into a fortune cookie store, get a special fortune cookie in order to get certain numbers. They would then have to put in to figure out the clue for where to go to the geocache. And they'd go to the geocache and they'd get some more secret numbers. And they'd go from there to have to go to like a voice mark in San Francisco. And I don't know if you guys know what voice marks are, but there you can leave like a message in a particular location in 3 dimensions anywhere, right? It's called a voice mark. And if you get the voice mark application, you can wander around. It's hard to do and get many interesting things here in Palo Alto, but in San Francisco, you can get all kinds of nutty, crazy messages all over the place. And so we had them listen, and then once they finished that up, then they would get the address for dinner, right? And the fine wine was served early, right? And they're all inherently competitive. And so literally, I was on a team, and I remember like running into the elevator, and like we closed the door before the other team could get in, because if they'd gotten in, they would have been at the front of the elevator, and they would have gotten out first. And then once you get your fine wine, then you get to sit there and you get to watch everybody else walking in later, and it was really exciting and fun. But again, what it forced them to do is it forced them to use these various applications, and we deliberately had some of them be delightful to use and some of them not be delightful to use, because when they're using it in real time, that's when they really feel it and when it really matters, especially if you've primed them using things like emotional journey maps. Yeah?
How did you get them to sign up for the hub?
Oh, how do we get them? They didn't have a choice. I mean, like, so again, CEO Brad Smith and Scott Cook is the founder of Intuit, and they're great. And they were huge champions of design for delight and design throughout the company. And so I got to work very closely with them, and these were Brad's offsites, and our CEO said, here's what we're doing. And you know, that's how you got to dinner, and if you didn't get to dinner, that was a big problem, right? But it was also a lot of fun. All right, so, and we'll get to that as well, because you know, executive support is really important, but it sure as hell is not enough, and it's not nearly as important as I used to think it was. Okay, so the other problem with execs, so even if you get execs who like are excited about design, right, what does that mean? Well, the other problem you're going to face is they really don't know what to do, right? They don't really get design, they don't really get designers, and once they're like, yes, we need to do this, they don't know what they need to do. And again, lots of research behind this, but there's usually a big gap between what people want to do and what they actually do. And BJ Fogg, who's coming in next week, he can share with you more of this, but people are creatures of habits, right? I think, yeah, those are kind of cute, aren't they? But I think that, you know, Dan Ariely talks about it a lot. Like, you know, you wake up in the morning, you think, you know, I'm going to be like, you know, Spock, and I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm going to get that oatmeal for breakfast. And then all of a sudden you go to breakfast and like, you know, Homer Simpson shows up and eats the donut, right? And it's like, crap, it happened again. Same is true with design. All right, so I'm going to probably spend about 5 minutes on design for delight at Intuit. It was actually a big part of my life, and Jay is nodding because it was a big part of his life too. That was a lot of fun. We had a great time. But a couple lessons from that. One is that senior leadership is actually not enough to support and change an organization and make it design driven. When we started Design for Delight, we had gone to that exec who kicked us out, and then we went to his offsite and we had people share their experiences, their personal experiences. And they got really excited about Design for Delight, and we decided we would make this an initiative at Intuit. And I was driving it, and founder Scott worked with me very closely on that. And Scott and I spent about a year. And we would bring in, we did everything right, I thought. So we would bring in speakers from outside who were from companies that were doing a really good job, right? Like we brought Tony Fadell in from Nest, because that was an example of some really great products that were produced. You know, we brought in Phil Levin from Evernote, because he was doing some really interesting work. We brought in Facebook, we brought in Netflix, we brought in all kinds of different companies. And we would do this on a monthly basis, and it was mandatory that everybody in the company, with the exception of customer support, attend and be present. Now, on top of that, we made it so that people would tend to watch that in groups, and they would have to report up through their general manager the one thing they learned and the one thing they were going to change. At the next CEO staff meeting, we would have a 2-hour conversation where everybody would talk about what they had learned and what they were going to do differently. I felt really good about that process because we had clear support, there was clear accountability, the general manager's own delight, and there was this persistent presence, right, of what was happening. At the same time, we created a process that we called the Design for Delight process, and we created these enormous boards and we put them up all over campus, not just a Mountain View campus, but San Diego and Massachusetts and everywhere. And after 1 year, absolutely not a damn thing had changed. Like not a single thing, right? And the word on the street is that, oh, well, this too shall pass. This was like the flavor of the year. Let's just keep our heads down and it'll go away. And I felt really sick to my stomach because frankly didn't know what to do. And I had some great teammates like Wendy Castleman and Joseph O'Sullivan, and we started to work with another woman named Suzanne Pelican, who eventually came and joined the team. And we decided that what we really needed to do was try something different. And we needed to coach people through this gap between what they want to do or what they say they want to do and how they're actually behaving. And that's what ended up launching what started off as a design catalysts, but then people thought that was about pixels, and so then it became the innovation catalysts. And it was those innovation catalysts that actually drove design thinking and design for delight into the company. Another big important shift for us is we moved from process to principles, because if you give people one more process, they're like, what the heck do I do with this? How do I integrate it into Agile or Scrum or the Toyota production system or whatever your favorite process is? It's really hard to figure out how to cognitively do that and how to change those habits. Whereas if you give people principles, like, okay, get some deep customer empathy, regardless of the process you're using, right? That becomes much easier for people to adopt. So these were some of the key factors in actually getting that behavior change to happen. Okay, so execs are also dangerous because they like to do things. Right? There's a phrase like idleness is for like the devil's hands, right? Devil's work makes idle hands. What is that phrase?
Idle mind is the devil's workshop.
Oh, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. Okay, well, there's an even worse one about hands, right? And the bottom line is, if you don't give them something to do, they are going to get in your way. So, one of the things we did that was very helpful was giving the execs a job, which was basically to get the hell out of the way. So this is actually a diagram from a while ago, but we had very clearly on here there would be a small team that was focused on creating that product experience, right? Probably a PM, maybe 2 designers, maybe 2 engineers, depending upon how complicated the back end was. And there would be 2 execs, no more than 2, that might be involved. And they had very clear jobs. One's job was to coach that team to stay true to their vision and their design principles, right? It's a pretty straightforward job, pretty damn important, and we needed help. And the second job, the second approver's job was to get rid of barriers and roadblocks the team might run into. The most important job of all they had was to keep all those people that are in white on the edge away from the team that was doing their job. So those are really important, valuable jobs. But what was most important is that we gave them something to do that would be creative and helpful. All right. Third learning about execs is they love measures, right? Love, love, love them. So lean into that. So this is a chart that I pulled together a while ago. What had happened is I was working really hard across the company to try to change the ratio of designers to PMs. And I worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. And I got absolutely nowhere after about 9 months. See, I'm getting smarter. The first failure took me a year to figure out I'd done nothing. The next one only took me 9 months to figure out I'd done nothing. So you're knowing that I think the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. I actually went out to companies that I respected and that I cared about. And I spent time with them, and I found out, well, what is your ratio? I asked them a whole bunch of questions. But one of the things that kept coming, well, what is your ratio? And a lot of these companies that I respected tremendously had a very different designer to PM ratio than Intuit had at the time. So once this chart was created, we saw dramatic shifts in the hiring behavior. And all of a sudden, this became something that we would review on a yearly basis, along with some other talent items with HR and our CEO and whatnot as well. So again, like these are deliberately not identifiable, but just know that getting ratios, super crazy important. Another number that was ended up being quite impactful was this notion of predict. How can you predict the experience that somebody has? Looking at both consumer and also business software, and a variety of companies that were in this space. A behavioral economist on my team, Paul Sass, found that there are 3 factors that impact delight. One is there a benefit you care about? The second is it easy to use? And the third is, does it make you feel good? Right? These are independent variables, and together they account for about 75% of the variance in Net Promoter. Slightly different numbers if it's consumer than if it's small business, but not tremendously so. I think of it as like a quarter. Just for comparison's sake, a lot of times we think that a tall father has a tall son, that's a fairly strong relationship. It turns out the father's height accounts for about 50% of the variance of the son's height. So this is way stronger, which meant that there was much more credence and acceptance of the notion that we would talk about these 3 dimensions separately. It would have to be thoughtful to design and produce for these 3 dimensions at once. All right. Oh, emotional. Okay. Has anybody ever been called emotional? Okay, yes. yes. I've got some yeses. So, what's interesting about the word emotional is it tends to be used for some people more than other people. And I'm not even going to make you tell me who you think it's used most for. I'll just tell you. It is used for women. Okay? So these are some studies that have come out of Texas and some kind of out of Yale and whatnot, and it's a very consistent set of literature. But the upshot is, and I'm going to read this, even though the communication content and approach are identical, women are perceived as punitive and negative, whereas men are perceived as direct and honest. And similarly, same general principle, we tend to ignore or reward men when they display anger, but we punish women when they display even small amounts of anger. And women who show even mild forms of anger are often viewed as emotionally out of control, less likely to be hired, and less likely to be advanced within their firms. Now, I will say that it's not just in women, by and large, there's a fine line if you're female. And you better be really careful to thread that closely, because what you do, even if it's the same as some guy, can be interpreted very differently, and usually not in a good way. But I also think that emotional is also sometimes a stereotype that people have of designers as well. So for the men and the non-designers in the audience, just be aware that you may be interpreting something as emotional when it's not. And women and designers, boy, thread this line carefully. Sound good? Okay. My not-so-secret to share is that I am a feminist, and I believe in increasing people's knowledge of this space, because it actually matters a lot. All right, so just to wrap it all up, lessons learned. 1, create visceral experiences. Right? Super duper powerful, much more powerful when people feel it in their soul than when they just hear it. Give execs a job. If you don't, they will find something to do, especially if they think what you're doing is interesting. And it may end up being fabulous, but it also may not. Okay? Lean into numbers, right? Pretty straightforward. And finally, speak the truth. So this comes out a lot when I see how executives are assessing people. This goes back to that long list of benefits versus the very short list of risks, right? Just speak the truth. Because what others are looking for all the time is who can I trust and who can I not trust? Because when you get to be very senior, there are a lot of people who are managing up who are trying to tell you what you want to hear. Okay? And so when people are actually speaking the truth and being credible, that has a really big impact, and those are the people that you want to be. Jay, go ahead.
What if you had uncomfortable situations speaking the truth to executives who maybe didn't want to hear?
Oh, that's a good question. What if you had uncomfortable situations when you spoke the truth? I think we should talk afterwards, because it might be about how you speak that truth, right? How do you thread that line of being non-judgmental? Okay, one of my big lessons, I've had so many lessons because I've fallen down on so many occasions. But one of them was about how judgment is so terribly toxic. So if anything smells of judgment, that also completely ruins credibility. And then finally, this darn juicer, I still have it actually in my home because it is such a glaring reminder to me of trying to meet people where they are versus where you might want them to be. And that's all I got.
We have a mic Derek can pass around for questions. If you guys want to just raise your hand, if you have, we'll do 5-10 minutes of questions real quick.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier to lean into the measurement, and I actually think that's incredibly important as part of what we do to structure something that you can measure.
Yep.
Because if you do measure it, then the next time you have this argument, you can point to numbers and go, it was this, we made it that.
Absolutely.
No one is going to get in your way. I mean, if you can prove that, you know, you will liberate so much resources and activity, and you're going to turn anybody who's even skeptical into a, where is the design book? Like, let me get some of this.
Yeah.
So I just feel like that measurement piece of it, it is the tactic that everybody's taught in business school. So you have to, so kind of think when you're doing it creatively about what could you measure and what would be great evidence, because then it also puts you in a position where you look like a fact-based.
Absolutely. They're not just look, you are fact-based, right? And I will say that, I mean, that's one of the benefits of all these individuals, of these executives, many of whom went to business school, not all, but many of whom, is that they do have this very much a shared language and these shared expectations. And so if you're not in sync with those, it's okay, but you better have a damn good reason for not being in sync. And when you can be in sync, and frankly, things around measurement are just good practice, yeah, do it. Yeah.
Of all the lessons that you've learned, and not just the ones in the slides, what would be one that you would say is probably the biggest, most important for a designer to get as early as possible to be successful in getting their designs into actual products?
Yeah, what would be the most important lesson in terms of getting designers to be successful? I mean, honestly, I think it's the judgment one, which, you know, I'm realizing I didn't have in here, but I think judgment is really tricky because when you're doing critique, you need to be you need to judge your work and you need to judge other people's work, but how do you do it in a manner that's about the work and not about the person? And that is really important, really important to learn, because if you're judging people, you're not going to be able to get a damn thing done, right? And that's not going to help them to do their best work either. So that's the I think the very most important, but it's hard. It's really hard. Yeah.
You mentioned the emotional woman designer, and I constantly struggle with the line of being passionate about my work and being emotional. And I'm wondering if you have any more lessons you could share with us, if any advice you have about that.
Oh, advice on that? Well, you know, reach out to me. I mean, I think it's just about picking and choosing when you do that, right? It's an accent. It's not the meal. Right? So I think it's about just being choiceful and thoughtful, and you don't want it to go away completely, but being choiceful and thoughtful is good. I mean, I wish I could be more prescriptive than that, but it's about judgment, and frankly, all of this is about trying something out and seeing where it works or doesn't work, right? And then trying something else out and seeing where that works and doesn't work. So it is no one exact recipe, especially because cultures differ as well.
I'm actually a creative director at Comcast, so I really appreciate the Comcast. But I wanted to ask you, this is all really great information, a lot of it hits home of what we're going through constantly. But there's also, one thing I'm running into now is the leverage that engineering and product teams tend to pull around Agile versus the design process and what is kind of considered still a waterfall design process, especially in large organizations where you do need to get a lot of approvals and a lot of people buying into things before you actually start to build and release. So I wondered if that also is something that you've worked with. And,
What I would say is I would say start small, and I would take one particular project you think can be set up for success, and I would make sure that is set up for success, even if it means doubling or tripling down the resources on your side, or even if that means kind of getting a sense for what's likely to come ahead, starting to do the work that needs to be done early, having that be very successful, because nothing is going to create more momentum than points of light, right? Even if they're small points of light, those are still points of light, and then it becomes much more about, okay, wait, how can we get more of that? Why can't we get more of that on our bigger products or our bigger projects? That's what I would try first. Okay, anything else? And if not, we can break. Okay, well, if anybody has any personal questions or anything, or not personal questions, you can ask me. Thanks, everyone.